welcome everyone. And I promise it won't be 3 or 4 hours. I have to get up at 4:15, so I'll be done in a little bit. But welcome. Thank you so much for coming. I found a way to not be a complainer. It's funny, when she was reading that passage, we read that same book almost every morning, that or a couple different ones. But anyways, that message has come up a few times, and I live in a house with 4 people plus me that love to leave lights on. Right? I love the dark. I shouldn't say I love the dark, but when I don't need light, I'm okay with not leaving it. If I leave a room, I turn off a light. I also live in a house with 4 people that leave sandals or sneakers or shoes anywhere. Wherever they decide to take their shoes on, that's where the shoes wind up. And I used to complain all the time. Who left the light on? Who left the shoes here? And now I just ask a question. I said, hey, would you guys like me to turn off the light, or do you want me to leave it on for you? I offer to help them, right? And it works, man. I'm starting to see shoes less often because, hey, would you like me to put those shoes away, or are you going to need them? And it's awesome. I'm still complaining, but I'm not really complaining, I guess. And it works. So that reminded me of that situation. But that's not our talk tonight, right? But it does kind of fit in, right? Because we can complain about different things, about spiritual growth and evolution, and or how science and religion don't always mix up, or why people disagree with maybe what we think, or they try to convert us to the way they think. And that could create complaining, but we don't, right? The Spiritist Key tonight's topic is from 3 different sources. The Gospel According to Spiritism, the book of Genesis, the last book of the codification of Spiritism, and a talk that I watched Dr. Vanessa Anceloni do, how she tied in this topic with depression and its incidents related to whether you're religious or not religious. And there's some very interesting data in here from some Gallup polls that we'll share tonight. But it ties in nicely to that message that we read earlier. But let's jump into it. And again, none of this material is mine. I just was simply asked to present on a topic. I found the information in Spiritist material, and I just put it on slides so we could talk about it tonight. So my thanks to the people that put that together, the spirits that put that together. So as we talk about this stuff, it's important, I think, to start the conversation with why are we here? Why do we get up every day? What was our mission for coming back to Earth via reincarnation, or whatever planet we wind up on in a future life, right? What's it all about? And ultimately, it's about the moral evolvement of our soul, right? The spiritual evolution of our being in this one life as we go from life to life throughout eternity. And we talk about this in many different ways, right? It's a frequent topic. The real life is not the material life, it's the spiritual life. How we are created the first time around, right? Simple and lacking knowledge. We all started the same way, created by God, simple and lacking knowledge. And ultimately, the more we emulate Christ and follow his example from his time here on earth, and listen to his good news, his message, the gospel, if you will, we progress more efficiently, less painfully, just following his playbook. So we talk about this a lot. And Dr. Anceloni, in her description of this, she talks about the Spiritist Key, which we'll dive into a definition of that shortly. But what's the difference, right, between Old Testament, New Testament, Spiritism, religion, spirituality? How does it all tie in, and why is Spiritism different yet makes sense? And she used this data, right? She's I believe a clinical psychologist, or maybe she's a researcher. She's a PhD in psychology, and a professor, I think, at one point. But anyway, she does research, and she helps people with her profession. And she shows this data, right? This talks about controlling for all these different variables in life: age, gender, race, ethnicity. How does religiosity and life tie into lifetime clinical diagnosis of depression? And what this first poll shows is that percent of people with depression, very religious people, 15.6, moderately and non-religious. And what you see here is the very religious people had the lowest incidence of dementia, right? And if we go to the next slide, they asked a question in this poll, right? The negative daily effect, emotions experienced a lot of the day yesterday. So how are you feeling yesterday? How did they answer this question? And they broke it into these three groups. And look at the very religious column, right? Worried, right? Only 30.6% of the people worried. Only 39.1% were stressed. Only 16.5% were sad. And 12.5% were angry. That very religious group is lower compared to these other groups. But those numbers are still high. 30% of these people responded as worrying, right? 39% said they were stressed, right? Yet they're still very religious. So why, right? That's the question. How does all this tie in? Right? And then she added illness and disease into this conversation. And her question here was, right, when people are ill or diseased in some way in the hospital, sick, facing a challenge like this, what's the percentage of them that report depression? And she cites the CDC here, right, that 77% of individuals, right, when people are ill, they report some degree of depression. Pretty big number, right? To be expected, right? If you're sick and in the hospital, if you're facing death, it might be a good chance you're going to be worried and depressed. So, the point here from the gospel, and as Dr. Anseloni ties it in, is regardless of the situation, right? Our mental health is critical to our happiness, and how can we really ascend and pay attention to our spiritual evolution without paying attention to our mental health? It's impossible to not put good mental health high on the list of things to pay attention to. But how often do we, right? How often do we pay attention to it? I was listening to a podcast yesterday. Over 50% of Americans, right, take some type of anxiety drug, right? Some type of depression, antidepressant or anti-anxiety drug. So it's heavily prescribed. It's heavily used in society. So it's definitely top of mind, and it's critical, right? But in the same podcast, this doctor was explaining her mission. She's a psychiatrist, a holistic psychiatrist, and her practice focuses on getting people off of these drugs, right? And she reminds us that, you know what? We're in a pandemic. It's okay to be a little depressed. It's okay to be a little worried, right? Or you lost your job, right? Or your paycheck is not there anymore. It's okay to be mad, right? So there's a percentage of this that it's okay. And then obviously it can become excessive if we don't pay attention to it. So I thought that was interesting. The higher depression rates when we're sick obviously creates an additional pathology that requires treatment. And this is the population that they were looking at in some of this work, right? The remission rate of depression of religious versus non-religious people when you added some type of pathology, cancer, heart attack, dementia, so some type of life-threatening illness. And look what they found, right? Dr. Koenig is a physician at Duke University, leading researcher in the area of spirituality and health. I work in healthcare, and it's more common today, but if you go back just 10 years, it was really uncommon for a doctor to pray with you or to talk about your religious beliefs or your spiritual beliefs. It's still not common, but it happens more today than it did just a decade ago. And Koenig is a physician that's, I wouldn't say he's a pioneer, but he's definitely leading. He's a prominent physician that really believes in the connection of spirituality and health and combining those two in life and at time of death, how that plays a part in reducing depression and increasing the quality of life. And here's what he found, right? In 2007, they had over 1,000 patients in this study with either heart failure or pulmonary disease. So life-threatening situations, right? And these patients all reported depression. And what they observed was the more religious the patient, the higher the remission rate for the depression. And it was upwards of 35%. 53% rather, right? Very high, right? And what he defined as very religious was not just that you believed in God or you went to church on Easter or you came to the Spiritist Center a couple of times a year, right? But what he defined, right, this was a combination of frequent religious attendance. So how often are we here on Thursday night or Monday night, or how often are you in church on Sunday or Bible study on Wednesday night, depending on your faith, or synagogue, right, on Fridays, what have you. Additionally, your degree of praying, right? How sincere is your prayer? How not just frequent in length, but praying from the heart. How involved or how important is that in your daily life? And then studying the Bible or studying whatever your faith is, right? And then this combination of things creates this high intrinsic level of religiosity, right? When people meet you or when they get to know you, they just know that you're a believer. You walk the walk, you talk the talk, right? It's not like you go and do these things. It's part of your life. Does that make sense? That's the definition that's the parameters for his definition of a very religious person. And among those people, right, they had a remission rate of 53%, right? And it makes us all ask, is what's happening to the body to make us or them feel better simply because they have this religious involvement? They're in a similar environment, they have a similar disease, right? Yet one group has a 53% better remission rate for depression. I don't know about you, but when I get sad, 53% sounds pretty good if I can clear it up faster, right? I want some of that, right? So that's the question, right? Because in his group, right, they're talking, it was primarily a Christian population. And the best-selling book ever, right, in the world is the Bible, right? It has many different names, right? It's got many different versions, it's been translated into pretty much every language, right? It's found everywhere in the world, and it's referenced by over 90% of the world's population. Not that 90% of the world necessarily are Christian or believe in it, but everybody acknowledges it and references it. It's the book, right, that you can definitely refer to if you're talking about Christ and religion, if you will, or from a Christian standpoint. So it's very popular. It's very well known, right? And the study of the Bible in Dr. Koenig's research, it boosts this new life mentality mentally and physically, right? People that study the Bible, people that have this fervent religiosity, just recovered better mentally and had a better physical outcome in a lot of cases. But his point, right, to this, why it was controversial or why it was surprising, right, this very same book, right, that creates these great outcomes for depression also divides us, right? People go to war over this, right? There's lots of discord, right? My belief is the real belief. Your belief is wrong. And that's one of the things that attracted me so much to Spiritism when my wife introduced me to it years ago. I had been through, at that time I was in my 30s, and I was raised Catholic. I thought about being a priest, and at one point in my life, I got disenchanted. I went to a Baptist church. I went to an evangelical church. I went to a Jewish synagogue. I went. You name the cult, church, or group. I checked it out because I wanted to belong. I wanted to find something, right? And none of it really talked to me till I found Spiritism. And the main reason for that was because of this, right? You take the same book, the same page, the same author supposedly, and you show it to 100 people, and you get 100 different interpretations. And people kill each other over this opinion, right? Drove me nuts. But anyways, when I found Spiritism, it just made sense, and all that went away. So where's the disconnect, right? His question is it the book? Is it the interpretation of the book? And actually, Bible just stands for, it's from a Greek word, biblia, right? It's a collection of books. That's it, right? It's just a collection of books, right? A book that we study as a culture, right, as a world, right? Our books, right? Take the gospel according to Spiritism. All that is Christ's teachings, right, with an interpretation from spirits, right, that are putting it into not modern day, but rational interpretation, as opposed to the allegory that quite commonly is attributed to Christ's words. Written by men, right? Said to be inspired by God. Is it the Word of God? Do you take it literally, right? It's in countless languages and countless versions, right? Leading to all these different interpretations. So why is it accepted and yet so controversial, right? That's not the topic for tonight, right? We could debate this another time. But what we're trying to understand tonight and what we're trying to get to the bottom of is how the study of this stuff, right, can lead us to harmony, especially in challenging times of our life. Why are religious people, right, fervently religious people, less depressed, right? And how can we find some of that for ourselves without dealing with the conflicts and the disagreements that go hand in hand with people that think differently than us? So, the Spiritist Key is basically this quote, right? Unshakable faith, that which can stand face to face with reason in all epochs or epochs of humanity, right? In other words, Kardec is quoted as saying very early in his study of Spiritism, right, in his codification of Spiritism, he says, look, if science ever disagrees with Spiritism, stick with science, right? Science makes the most sense. Stick with science. If you can't prove it with science, then follow the science, right? And that's basically what this is saying, right? There has to be, you can't just have blind faith. That was one of my biggest dilemmas with other religions I tried to get involved with. It's just, well, why? Oh, that's just the way it is. That's, my father believed that, his father believed that. This is the way it is. You don't have to, there's no why, it's just, that's the way it is, right? Blind faith. And in Spiritism, we bring this reason and faith together. You can ask why. You can ask for the answer. You can go and read the answer, right? All these things about miracles that are these big question marks in the Bible, right? There's explanations for that in Spiritism, right? No, it's not a miracle. It's because of this, and this. So there's no conflict between science and religion. They seamlessly come together, and that's the beauty of this philosophy. So how's that happen, right? The faith that cannot be shaken is the one that you combine with reasoning, right? That is, Spiritism brings to us, what it brings to us is there's no more fear of thinking or asking questions, right? There's never a bad question. And people always say that there's no stupid question, no silly question. Well, that's not always the case in some places, right? But there really is no silly question when it comes to this stuff. Simply because there's three pieces, right? I think, how many of you ever heard about a three-legged stool, right? One-legged stool is real hard to sit on, right? Two legs is kind of hard too, but three is just enough, right? Three is enough to give you balance, right? And that's how I think of Spiritism. It's a three-legged stool. You've got the philosophy, right? And that's the inner growth, right? We all have our own philosophy. We live by our own philosophy. That's what guides us. And as we study Spiritism, as we try to follow those examples of Christ, we experience inner growth. That's the philosophy piece of this. Science is the study, right? What did the study start with? Remember, back in the 1800s? Table wraps, right? Right? That's how it started. That was a science. Well, what happened? It was studied. It was understood. It was interpreted, right? And that's grown into a whole manual on mediumship and the ability to communicate with spirits that have gone on to the other side, right? That's a real science, right? And it's studied. And then the religion piece to Spiritism is service or charity, right? You'll notice in a Spiritist center, we don't wear uniforms. We don't have symbols on the wall. And I would doubt that any of us really would say that Spiritism is a religion in the traditional sense. But it does have that religious component in the sense that it's all about service and helping others, and however we choose to do that. So those are the three inherent pillars, if you will, the foundation of Spiritism. Did you raise your hand?
Yeah, just behind you.
What's behind me? Oh, it's right behind me. Oh, well, look at that. Thank you. All right. So, in the Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 1, item 5, right, it talks about Spiritism being a science that provides evidence of the existence of the spiritual world. Think of Spiritism as the science that studies the origin of spirit, right? The origin, the nature of spirit, and its interaction with the material world, right? Because all I am at the end of the day, right, is an eternal being, a spirit that happens to be incarnated on the earth in my envelope, right, in my physical envelope of flesh, connected to my spirit via that perispirit that we can't see visibly, but it's there that connects us. All of my interactions here on earth impact my spirit, right? It's embedded, ingrained in that forever. I'm just short term here, right? My 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, whatever it's going to be. God forbid it's only 53. I'm not ready, right? I want to live some more. But my point is, when it's done, it's not the end of my spirit, right? It's the end of this life, right? And I go on and grow and to the next, right? But anyways, this is Spiritism, right? The study of the origin of spirit, right? The nature of spirit, and its interaction with the material world. In number 6, in 1 number 6, it talks about the history of religion, if you will, right? The Old Testament, right? Moses personified that. It's called the Mosaic Law, right? In some ways, everybody knows the 10 Commandments, right? The rules, God's rules, right? Is what He delivered via God to His people at the time. Christ obviously personified the New Testament, right? Christ walked the earth as a man. We all know His story, right? He had apostles. He taught the gospel, the good news as it was called. The apostles were the followers of His way. He was crucified, right? And to this day, Christ has had a huge impact on Christians around the world, right? Christ is well known for talking or speaking in allegories. So stories, right, that you could interpret many different ways. And the explanation for that is that Christ spoke in the language of the time. If Christ spoke as we are speaking today, or as we understand what spirits are telling us today, the people weren't ready for it. They were still an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, right? And He took them from that to love, right? And He did that in allegories in a lot of ways, and through what was considered miracles, right? Depossessing someone, raising the dead, removing leprosy, right? Water and bread, right? Multiplying it for the masses, right? So a lot of stories about that in the New Testament. And then Spiritism brings us the voice of the spirit world. So don't imagine, right? It's in our books. It's in what we talk about. We have the benefit now, because of the science, right, of being able to read and hear from those spirits that have gone before us. The Gospel according to Spiritism, Genesis, which is a great book, right? The last book of the codification, that we're going to talk about some of those questions tonight. That's the Spiritist interpretation, the explanation of the book of Genesis in the Bible, where it breaks down the science and the actions in a much more, that balance of science and reason, right? It brings it all together, where it's not miracles, where it's not, hey, that's just the way it is, don't ask any questions, right? It's awesome. And at the end of the day, it's about each one of our individual destinies, right? We're all destined for perfection, right? The question is how many lives and how much pain, right, are we going to go through? Not because we have a gray cloud over our head, not because God likes me more than He likes you, or vice versa, but because of our choices, right? Free will, right? We're all accountable for our actions. We will all atone for our actions, right? And ultimately, though, when this material life ends, for me, for you, for us, the next step, right, is heavily tied to the choices we've made today and what we need to overcome and fix. So in chapter 1, item 7, we're reminded that Christ told us that He didn't come to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. He was accused of blasphemy. He was accused of trying to just destroy the law of God, right? Simply not His mission, right? But Spiritism, what we have to remember is that Spiritism doesn't teach anything contrary to what Christ taught, but rather develops it and explains what to many were simply stories or miracles, right? That couldn't be explained at the time, right? But when you read the Gospel according to Spiritism, it's just beautiful to read sections of it I remember reading and learning about in catechism as a kid that didn't make any sense to me, but now they make sense. All right, so going on with the Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 1, item 8, we're reminded that science reveals the laws of the material world, right? Biology, chemistry, physics, right? Those are all physical sciences, right? And they explain the laws of matter. But then they remind us that religion reveals the laws of the moral world, right? With how we live. What is morality, right? What does that mean, right? Morality or moral. How do you live a moral life, right? And that's what religion does for a lot of us, right? Regardless of our religion, when you read a lot of the world's religions, a lot of the basic tenets and core beliefs are all about moral behavior and how to live. But Spiritism, and especially in this section, it really makes us aware. It draws the line and it says, look, there's no difference between the two. Material laws are from God. Religious laws or moral laws are from God, right? It's the same principle, right? Whether it's material or it's religious. They can't contradict each other. And that was always the case, I found, with religion and science, or religion in my mind, right? There were contradictions. And what Spiritism's done for me and for others is the contradictions are gone. They have to correlate. Science and religion should come together because there's only one God and there's really only one truth, right? They've got to make sense. So why all the disagreement, they ask, right, in this section? There shouldn't be, they teach us, right? Because there's only one God, right? God's perfect, right? There's no imperfection. Therefore, it can't be God, right? He's not, or she's not the blame, right, for all the disagreements. It's got to be us, right? Because of incorrect interpretations, because of science saying they're right, or religion saying they're right, or this religion or that religion. Everybody's saying, hey, my way. I have a great friend who's a Seventh-day Adventist. I've known this guy since I was 8 years old. Right, I guess he's 60 now. Man, he's getting old, isn't he? My goodness, hard to believe he's 60. Anyways, I was probably who knows how tall I was, but he's a great friend of mine, and we have these incredible talks about religion, right? And we don't disagree. We respect each other. And my line to him always is, man, I can't wait to see you on the other side, and we'll see who was right. You know, because at the end of the day, I think we're all wrong to a certain extent. That's my thought. That's not Spiritism teaching, but that's my 2 cents. Where we are today, our level of knowledge and intellect and ability to understand all of this is exactly where it is. And I don't think we have the knowledge to truly understand and comprehend it all. I think there's more to come. So I can't wait to see all of you on the other side, and we'll compare notes, right? But because of that belief of his and mine, we get along great. Because we agree to disagree, or we agree that maybe we don't really know. And it's not always like that when people talk religion. Excuse me. So the takeaway here from item number 8 is that materialism is not exclusive to science. Excuse me. And they tell us that religion has to stop ignoring the organic and the immutable law of matter. Matter's real. There's physical laws of nature. There's God's laws or natural laws that govern nature, right? Like gravity. There's no escaping it, right? The missing link, they tell us, is contained in the knowledge of the laws that govern the spiritual universe and its relationship with the world of matter. And that's finally where we are in society. Think about things that are on TV or on the internet. There's tons of stuff now on mediumship, on near-death experiences, on that experience between lives, right? There's all kinds of stuff, from mainstream stuff to things in the media, news and documentaries. There's a lot of awareness now to these things that just 10, 20 years ago, you just didn't hear about. So we're coming to that point in society where that relationship is blending better, and we're doing better for sure. But we still have more work to do, obviously. All right, just 2 more hours, right? Okay, good. I want to make sure. I don't want to run late. So, from Genesis, and which is, again, the last book of the codification, it talks about Spiritism applying the experimental method, right? We talked about the table wraps, then we talked about how that evolved from simple wrappings to instruments to where now mediums, right, don't need any tools, right? It comes out written, it comes out spoken, there's visualizations, right? And that was all the experimentation, and then the theory and all that was proved. The point here is this science of observation is real, right? Mediumship exists, reincarnation exists. We have the ability to communicate with spirits, and it's proven, right? It's not just imagination or take my word for it. We have proof, right? Genesis goes on to tell us that Spiritism and science complete each other. They don't compete. They complete each other. You can't have one without the other, right? Because that would leave a void in all this. Science without Spiritism leaves void. Spiritism without science would lack support and control. You can't have one without the other. And simply goes on to tell us that the laws of matter had to be studied first, since they're the first to strike the senses, which makes sense. So, by studying the properties of the perispirit, that's that cord, if you will, that connects the body and the spirit, right? There's all kinds of stuff, right? There's fluids in there. There's a physiological attributes of the soul, right? And the study of this, right, opens up new horizons of sciences and phenomena. So when we go into this room to receive a pass, that whole exercise, right, is about balancing the chakras, about bringing balance to those ports, if you will, those connections, right, to the spirit and the soul, that intermediary, that connection, if you will. Not about miracles, not about performing acts of phenomena, if you will, but actually science and using that to help balance us. These are just examples listed in Genesis of things that in the past would be considered demonistic or miraculous or just things you can't explain. Well, there's science for all of these things, and you can read about them in the various books of the codification. Genesis goes on to tell us that Spiritism demonstrates that these phenomena are based on laws, and it presents the normal conditions in which they can be reproduced, no longer considered extraordinary or supernatural or what have you. All right? There's a very strong scientific definition for it. So with Spiritism, right, there's no denying the gospel, right? It doesn't take away the significance. It doesn't alter or try to change anything that Christ taught us. It simply explains and develops everything that Christ said and did, shining the light or shedding the light on topics often thought to be allegorical or taboo or unacceptable, right? It just brings it all together. So, to tie this up, right, the impact of these things on our life, going back to the depression studies, going back to just daily living, right? I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you've got to come here every day and you have to pray every day and you've got to do all these things, right? But from not just experience of putting it into my life on a daily basis as much as possible, but the science that we read about, the polls that we saw early in this, I show you this simply to remind you, right, that a combination of these things on a daily basis does what? Makes you happier, reduces your likelihood of depression, makes it easier for you to come out of depression if you do get depressed, because depression is normal, right? It happens. It's okay to get depressed about things or upset or mad. The problem is when it lingers and it worsens. So doing a little bit of this every day, right, is going to help you. So I encourage you to do it. And then finally, leave you with this, right? Just the three pillars or three components of life in Spiritism. How much do you want to grow? Do you want to go to bed tonight a little bit fuller than you did when you woke up? All right? Did you do a better job? Did you help someone, right? Did you grow? Did you study, right? Or you just take my word for it, right? Did you open a book today? How many resources do we have on YouTube, right? Great speakers from around the world in just about every language on Spiritism. There's no reason we can't study a little bit every day, right? We have a library here with, I bet you there's 200 books on those shelves. Take one home. Doesn't cost a thing. Study a little bit every day. And then, did we serve our fellow man today? What did I do to help my neighbor today, right? What's the best thing I can do to help my neighbor? Think about this for a minute. This is my 2 cents. This is not from any of the books. Right? I think the best thing we can do to help our neighbor is help ourselves a little bit. Make ourselves happy by studying, by helping. And then, as our light shines within us, we share that. Right? I think far too often, we are our own worst critic, right? We beat ourselves up. I've said this before, or I've asked this before. If I cut my finger with a razor today, and I get a little nick, right? What happens? I bleed a little bit. It heals. What if I did that every day for 50, 60 years? Before you know it, I don't have an arm because I've just nicked it like crazy, right? So I got to stop cutting myself, right? Condemning myself, criticizing myself, being mad at myself for what I did yesterday, right? How many of you can, and don't spend a whole lot of time, I don't want to bring you down, but how many of you can think of an event that you wish never happened to you at one point in your life because it wasn't a good event? How many times did it happen? Once. One time, right? Every time you think about it, every time you have regret for doing it, every time you seek revenge for the person that did it to you, it's happening again in your head. There's MRI studies, right, of actual physical or mental pain in the moment, and it lights up the MRI one way. And then there's MRIs of the brain when people are just thinking about that event. Guess what? The brain lights up exactly the same way, whether it's physically happening or you're just remembering that it happened. Right? So somehow we have to reduce the impact of that. And those tools, right, are a great way to do it. And a little bit of self-forgiveness. So I'm going to stop talking so that we're not here for 3 hours. So thank you for your time and your attention, and I appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you.